Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we're going to talk about the Mark 38, the finest gun system that Battleship New Jersey never had. We talked about this weapon system last in 2019 when we only had a couple thousand followers. I think that video only has 3,000 views. So even though we've covered it in a past video, we're going to bring it up one more time. The Mark 38 was started to be adopted in the late 70s, but it really doesn't start to go into wide production, in the Navy at least, until the late 80s, early 90s. And this sort of weapon system is still used today on modern ships. In fact, most of your surface warships, your Arleigh Burke destroyers, your Ticonderoga-class cruisers, have a pair of these, one on each side. The Navy started to realize in the late 70s that its .50 caliber machine guns, which have both a limited range and a limited amount of stopping power, couldn't really stop small boats. And things like the terrorist attack on USS Cole, where a small boat was able to run into the ship and blow up, doing tremendous damage to that vessel, really convinced the Navy that they needed something with a little bit more stopping power. So they decided to go with the 25 millimeter, which is both a NATO standard round and a weapon system that was already in production for the Army. The heart of the Mark 38 machine gun system, MGS, is the M242 barrel, called the Bushmaster. This is the same sort of barrel that's in the Bradley fighting vehicles, famously used by the US military during the Gulf War, and famously used in the war in Ukraine nowadays. So this is a contemporary weapon system. It is paired with the Mark 88 mount, and what makes this a chain gun, as opposed to earlier weapon systems on this ship, say for example the Oerlikon 20 millimeter, it's not using the hot gases of the spent shell casings to cycle the gun. It is electrically powered, and that electric power is feeding the ammunition through a chain and taking care of the extraction, all that sort of stuff. In many ways, while it requires power, it makes this a cleaner system since you don't have the hot spent gases cycling back through it, clogging it up. So this gun system only takes a single sailor or Marine to operate it, and 2 sailors trained on how to maintain it. So earlier in the video, I commented on this being the greatest gun system that the Battleship never had. Yet, here it is. What do I mean by that? So, these very slowly went into production during the late 80s and early 90s. The number of mounts for these guns, the number of ships that needed these, were less than the number of weapon systems that were actually installed. So, Battleship New Jersey never carried these. The museum didn't know this back in the 20-teens. We have the mounting point that this bolts to. It's a ring welded to the deck. If we go below that, there's actually an electrical power panel that has a tag on it that says Mark 38. So for all intents and purposes, it looked like we had this. We've also seen pictures of both Missouri and Wisconsin with this weapon system on board. And the icing on the cake is that we have orders for the ship's Marines to turn the 5-inch gun mount that they would have manned in the 80s over to the sailors and retrain on this weapon system instead. So right around 1990, right at the end of the ship's career, the Marines, who throughout the ship's entire career that they were on board, with the exception of Vietnam when they weren't on board, would have manned one of the 5-inch guns, usually the aftmost ones here. Nowadays, Mount 55. However, right at the end of the ship's career, they're taken off of that, retrained on this weapon system. We'll get back to the video in just a second, but first, we're doing dry dock tours of the Battleship, starting on April 6th and running through at least the end of May. On weekends, we will be taking groups of people into the dry dock to see Battleship New Jersey out of the water. There's a link in the description below if you're interested in participating. This is potentially a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see a battleship, especially an Iowa-class battleship, out of the water. Other modifications are visible. You can see the weld marks on the deck where the old 20 millimeter mounts that had been here were moved. When those were removed, probably right after World War II or just before she's reactivated for Korea, they're replaced with 40mm saluting guns like this one, 2-pounder saluting guns, and those fit on the exact same base. So in Korea and Vietnam, we would have carried 2 of those right here. Would have been one here and one over there. In the 1980s, it seems like there was probably only one on board on each side, but right at the end of the ship's career, they do a couple of things. They cut the bases off of both of those and they move them so that this is now more centered to get better arcs of fire, and the saluting gun is pressed all the way over here so that 1, it's out of the way, and 2, it's still there, it can still do what it needs to. And they cut the gun tub away and replaced it with this collapsible railing so that it's still protected, but it can fold out entirely so that the weapon system can depress to shoot at small boats. We are up on the 01 level here, so you can probably see the pier below me. There's a significant way down. Interesting thing about this weapon system, it can only elevate to 55 degrees, so it's no good at all against aerial targets. It'll be interesting to see if this is improved at all now that drones are a common thing and it's much cheaper to shoot them down with a gun system like this than with a missile. Also, this type of manned mount, remember I said they cut away the shield, that leaves the sailor here relatively exposed compared especially to, say, the old 20mm Oerlikons that had a shield on them. This doesn't. So pictures we have of these guys, they're wearing the flak jackets, the Pas-G jackets and helmets of the late 80s, early 90s. Not bulletproof vests, but they've got some armor on at least. And that's their whole protection. With the shield gone, the gun mount itself, the ammunition storage and whatnot is their entire protection. So the Navy has switched over to a remote-controlled mount. So somebody inside the skin of the ship can basically use a joystick and a computer monitor to fire this off on board modern ships, although some of them still have this manned version. Again, the production is not at all keeping up with the demand on these ships. So I talked about how we wouldn't have had these. It seems like when New Jersey went to the Persian Gulf in '89 and '90, there weren't enough, and one was not installed. The ship would have used 40mm grenade launchers and 50 cals in that sort of role. It seems like the Marines also had some M60s issued at that time, and they might have even had some shoulder-fired rockets as well. Stinger missiles and maybe LAWs were a potential, but I can't say with 100% certainty. So we had some small arms that could deal with small boat threats. By 1991, when Missouri and Wisconsin go to the Persian Gulf, they are issued these weapon systems, and that's when pictures of these show up on Iowa-class battleships. Because New Jersey is decommissioned at that time, she never gets one installed. But like I said, in the early 20-teens, Weapon Station Earl here in New Jersey had a couple of these demilitarized, and they offered them to the museum. And my predecessor looked at all the evidence and said, yeah, this is awesome. Not only do we have the mounts where this is supposed to go, but because this is a contemporary system, it is not on display at any other museum as far as we know. So we want that, yeah. So we got it, we installed it, we have it now. Great. When you come out and visit the museum, you can see it. And this is probably the only place you can. But then subsequent research showed us that we never carried it on board, despite the body of evidence that seemed to indicate that we would have. At that point, we decided, since this is the only place where you can see this, that we wanted to leave it on display, and it makes a really interesting story. So when you guys come and visit us this summer, you should be able to see this. Is this really the finest weapon system that Battleship New Jersey never had? Let us know in the comment section down below what are some weapon systems that actually existed that you think should have been retrofitted on the Iowa-class battleships. I would have loved to have seen the 3-inch 50 anti-aircraft guns replace the 40mm. I also love the 20mm Thunderbolt mounting, a quadruple powered mounting. Now I don't know which one I like the most, but let me know what you like the most in the comment section down below. Which one do you think the Iowa should have gotten? Oh, Sea Sparrow missiles. We really needed those too. Man, The Navy could have done so much more with these ships. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about the museum on our channel. Thanks for watching.